Oh, it flips. Good morning, buenos días. My name is Genevieve Flores-Haro. I'm the Associate Director for the Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project, or MICOP for short. And before we go in, so this is me. This is me in a celery field. And our organization is a community-based organization. We are not a disaster relief organization, but when the fires hit, the Thomas Fire in 2017 hit, that's what we became. And so this picture was taken after we had a meeting with our managed care plan, and then we noticed there were farm workers out in the fields without respiratory masks. So my colleague and I parked the car after our managed care plan meeting in our business attire, flats, slipping through celery, making sure that these farm workers had access to protection. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but just context for that picture, that's celery. So this is an area of the Thomas Fire. The Thomas Fire started December 4th, 2017 at night. And at the time that it had been extinguished, it was the largest wildfire in California history, was eclipsed in 2018 by the Mendocino Fire. But at the time we were the biggest. We expanded both Ventura and Santa Barbara County. And so that's just a general overview of where the fire was. You can see in this corner over there, there's Santa Paula, that's in the Santa Clara Valley, also still part of Ventura County. And just for a little context for folks unfamiliar with the Central Coast, so the little blue dot is where we're located in Oxnard, about an hour and 15 north of Los Angeles, 40 minutes south of Santa Barbara. So just for some context, I heard in the last talk that it was very Northern California heavy, so as part of the Southern California delegation, hello. So yeah, like I said, at the time it was the largest wildfire in recorded history. And just giving you a little bit of context about Ventura and Santa Barbara County, I believe there was a USA Today report recently that was released that named Ventura County as one of the richest counties in the nation, and I feel left out, quite frankly. But what we see in Ventura County and in Santa Barbara County as well, which were the areas that were impacted by the Thomas Fire, is a separation between, like social economic separation. So you do have affluent folks living in the hillside, and those are the main population that was impacted by the Thomas Fire. Hillside homeowners, and then later in Santa Barbara County, when we had a debris flow, again, those were in Montecito, that's where Oprah and Ellen live. So more affluent folks being impacted by these fires, right? You would think. We also have a large population of farm workers, a large population of domestic workers, landscapers, and so you can really see the split in both counties in terms of like who has access to economic power and who does not, and in terms of the narrative of wildfires, whose story gets told and whose story does not get told. So again, that's just a list. I'm sure this has come up a lot for you guys, this list of wildfires in California, so we'll skip that. And just a little bit more of context of just the climate context that we're living in terms of wildfires becoming our quote-unquote new normal and the projections for the coming decades. So as Oscar mentioned when he spoke in the Sonoma County fire, we in Ventura County also had our own issues. Oopsies, how do I go back? There we go. Technology does not like me either. Oh, God. Let's wait a moment. Nope. Caroline. I think it's good. That's what I've been doing. Yeah, it's just bugging out. We'll continue. So also in Ventura County, we had issues with language access as well. In fact, the night of the fire, I was in my car. The hillsides were orange. We were pitch black because the power went out both in all of Ventura County and half of Santa Barbara County. So being the head of my organization, wanting to push out information that I had, everything I found was in English. And I was in my car because my phone was at 18%, because you don't really plan for wildfires, right? And so there I was translating whatever I could get my hands on to push it out. The organization I work for, we are an Indigenous serving organization working with Indigenous migrants, and part of that work is community organizing, direct assistance, but we also have a radio station. So we are able to take information and put it out quickly and with a high reach, with that high trust that Oscar had also mentioned. So trying to do that, not finding anything, and it actually took 10 days for our county to put information in Spanish. And the Spanish information was great, but again, that leaves out our indigenous language-speaking migrants who speak in our county, Mixteco, Zapoteco, Otomi, Wave, which are completely different from Spanish. So there again was another population that was left out of language access work. And so then again, it becomes incumbent on us as the CBO to get that information out. And so I wanted to play really quickly a video from one of my colleagues who's giving information on the air quality and the importance of the N95 respirator masks in Mixteco.
Santa Maria yo mi proyecto Mixteco mi Santa Maria yo yo mi Santa Maria yo Oxnard mi mascarilla chida tu ta kundai ni to cuántos kundai ni to yo Oxnard yukukai chica tu mas tu tu chica mayo kuka sadaño shin yo mi Santa Maria yo donde yo
So as you can tell, the language is nothing like Spanish. It's completely oral language, 3,000 years old. Across the state of California, we're estimating our population is about 175,000, mostly along the Central Coast, mostly farm workers. And again, the need for getting this information out was crucial because, again, our folks are out there working in the fields. No one was talking to them. Their supervisors on the fields were not talking to them. Spanish media hadn't gotten to them yet, and if it could, they couldn't understand it because a lot of our community members are monolingual in their indigenous language. So again, that's the organization stepping up and filling that gap. And like I mentioned, the air quality, while it wasn't anywhere as bad as it was in the 2018 fires, it was still pretty bad in our region. And like I mentioned, a lot of our folks are farm workers. That time was me. A lot of folks are farm workers, and when we were out there giving out N95 masks, they just had a bandana, or they just had a medical mask that was provided to them, if that. But you can see how bad it got during the Thomas fire. In the last panel, someone had talked about drinking water, and so for our community, because of the lack of access or the lack of language access, although city municipalities were putting out boil water advisories, that information wasn't getting to our community as well. In fact, one of the local municipalities put out a press release that said, you know, the first lines were in Spanish, and it said, make sure you understand this or have someone explain it to you, and then went into how you could not cook, clean, bathe with the water. And again, in Ventura County, in terms of Spanish speakers, it's a third of our population that speaks Spanish. And then we're about a county of 800,000. So of the 800,000, 24,000 are indigenous language speakers. So again, folks definitely getting left out. And so it was our organization, MyCop, our partner organizations, Cause, Future Leaders, stepping up and stepping in to fill those gaps, to get water out to community, to get the N95 masks out. I think it's good. Because again, as Oscar also mentioned, what you see is, you know, we as community-based organizations understand the inequities that exist in our communities, but it takes the natural disaster happening to expose that and bring that to a broader platform. So again, a lot of our community members, although they didn't lose houses, maybe we had 13 farm worker families in total that lost houses, which was devastating for them. And thankfully, there were a lot of folks to step up and step in for those folks. But a lot of our folks couldn't afford to evacuate. If they were in evacuation zones, they got left behind. There's a street in Ventura, the city of Ventura, called the Avenue, predominantly working class, immigrant, and 80% of them stayed because they just couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford to get the hotel room. They couldn't afford to purchase the water themselves or the batteries when they were in blackout. And then in terms of like economic and health impact, our workers definitely felt that. So in terms of the farm worker community, again, you're out there working, and for the first couple days of the fire, they were breathing in whatever was in the air. And so post-fire, we saw a lot of farm workers coming to us saying, you know, I developed pneumonia. I developed asthma. There was an extreme case of a man that we were working with, an indigenous farm worker, who he went back to Mexico because he was so disabled with his respiratory disease he couldn't go back to work. And so those are the stories that we were hearing from farm workers who were impacted. In terms of the economic impact to farm workers, although, like I said, not a lot of folks lost their house, if they were sent home from work, which finally some of the growers did, like I think the second or third week of the fire, they were sent home. And there's no unemployment, there's no safety net program for them, so they lost money. In our case, the school district was closed for about 6 weeks, so that means their kids were home, which meant that the kids weren't getting the free lunch, the free breakfast, and so that's another economic impact. Childcare, because now all the kids are home, was another thing on our families' minds. And so on and so forth. So these are unintended consequences or impacts that you don't really think about in terms of who is impacted. Usually, again, it's the homeowner, it's the folks who lost property, but there's a ripple effect as well. And so that's in Santa Maria, because we went as north of Santa Maria. And then the other piece I wanted to name is the work on, or the impact on domestic workers and service workers. So we saw this more in Santa Barbara County. And again, when these big houses get burned or when these big houses get wiped out by a mudslide, that's also someone losing an income, losing their income, losing the house or a person that they would work for. And so that's a lot of what we saw as well. Hotel workers in Santa Barbara County, domestic workers working in Montecito, landscapers, and so on. So those are folks who completely lost their source of income because of the fires and the subsequent mudslides. And then also wanting to name the mudslides as something that further impacted communities because of the economic situation in the Central Coast between Ventura and Santa Barbara County. You have a lot of folks living in Ventura County but commuting to Santa Barbara County to work. So when the debris flow happened, it completely shut down the 101, which was the main vein that folks would take. So we had, people setting up, to go to Santa Paula, you can take the airplane into Santa Barbara Airport, or you can take the ferry, but the ferry was $30. So again, folks are left without viable modes of transportation. We actually modeled our DocuFund after the Sonoma County DocuFund. So we were very fortunate that we could collaborate with those folks up here to replicate that down home. The issue that we had was purely fundraising. It took us about a year to get through our list. We saw about 1,300 families, almost $2 million were given away. But a lot of the money that we had received were from folks who, like from the United Way, from the Red Cross, who had leftover, who had surplus. And so they couldn't find anyone to give it to. So eventually they gave it to us, and even that in itself was a little bit complex for us, trying to demonstrate that we had a need, because there was a thought that, undocumented people aren't affected by this wildfire if they didn't lose their home. It's also trying to advocate and prove that as well. And then, so there were barriers to accessing mainstream relief. A lot of these organizations, although they do really good work, they didn't have the language access piece. They weren't well known as our organizations were, so that trust piece was missing. This is some photos from our clinics that we would have. And then in terms of long-term impacts, like has been mentioned, housing stock was impacted for us. Again, a lot of these folks who lost their house, that was like their house in the hills. And so what they ended up doing is pushing the renters out on their second home, which were our community members. So also impacting renters in that way. Again, the 101 was closed. That's a shot of the 101. And then not even a year from the 2017 Thomas Fire, we had the Woolsey Hill Fire. And so this fire happened while, again, we were still serving people impacted by the Thomas Fire with our DocuFund. That is the map of both fires. And the interesting thing about this fire is that this fire got more media attention than the first fire. So this photo in particular went viral of farm workers working in this terrible air quality. And we actually had we had the lawyer who represented the growers tell us, those nonprofits, they're just faking it. They're just, taking the picture from a really bad angle, and it's not that bad. It was that bad. Yeah, it was that. We have 360 videos. It was that bad. So the media piece was very interesting for us. The good news and one of the difference I would say is that we were prepared this time, for better or for worse. We had stockpiles of these N95 masks during the Thomas Fire. We had to scramble for them. And I remember distinctly going to Home Depot, asking for them, going to buy them, and the manager told me, we have to save these for the regular customers. So again, some lessons learned really quickly. I know I've got a minute left. just thinking beyond property values. I know in terms of like environmental justice work and things like that, we think about like just the climate and like the landscape, but there's people behind that as well. Again, unintended, people get caught in the crossfire of these issues. Again, lifting up the existing inequities that exist in our communities, and then just some systemic and policy change. Again, this isn't our bread and butter. We are not disaster relief organizations, but we stepped up and we continue to step up. So part of that was working with our Assembly Member's office in authoring supporting, she authored it, AB 177, which would require language access in threshold languages. Our state senator has authored SB 160, and that would require cultural competency in disaster planning. And so that's passing through the process right now. We're working on legislation to support mask distributions, because it's not a requirement for growers to give their farm workers masks when the air quality is bad. So working with Cal OSHA on that. State disaster funding, it's like a state undocu fund, because it's not sustainable for us as CBOs to keep doing the work, even though we are still seeing folks from the Woolsey Hill fire. Health for All, which had just passed, for young adults has just passed. Transportation infrastructure, and then also data sharing protections, because when we were working with our other CBOs, like the United Way, the Red Crosses, they wanted us to use a database, but that database was managed by the Department of Homeland Security under FEMA, Border Patrol, et cetera. So how can we best protect that data if we want to be included? So thank you so much.